Joining us now on the Rich Eisen Show. It's so rare that I get to have a conversation. Normally I'm like, Jane, the floor is yours. And she talks for 60 seconds and throws it back to me on game day morning. So I actually get to say hello to you, and then we talk, Jane Slater. That's how it works here.
Hey, I get 40 seconds on Sunday,
Okay,
so
sorry.
I'll take the extra time.
Don't sell her short.
Short change there.
Nobody tell Jane Slater to rap during this conversation, okay? Let her talk.
We have a full 30 minutes.
Great question, Jane. You hit the nail right on the head there with that question to McCarthy. Why should fans buy in to this?
Well, to be fair, Rich, you know, when you start anything with respectfully, which I did, I was hoping it would cushion it because it is a fair question right now. TJ can speak to it. Our engineer, Thomas, of the NFL Network, my father. I feel like people forget that I'm not related to anyone that owns the Cowboys. I can't fix anything. I'm not rich. So they come to me for group therapy, but it was a fair question because if you listen to Dallas radio this morning, so upset that Mike McCarthy is coming back for yet another year, the final year of his contract. I kind of felt like the writing was on the wall this week and that Jerry was going to talk himself back into it. After talking to the players, Rich, this team, they looked like they quit on him in that playoff game. They've looked like they've quit on him in several playoff games now. This is now 3 seasons in a row. But talking to these players, that was absolutely not the direction of my conversation. And, you know, whether people like to hear this or not, Jerry is a very shrewd businessman. And I was told when he was frustrated last year, he didn't want to pay out Mike McCarthy 2 years remaining on his contract. It's still very frustrating for a coach. I know Mike talked about it today. It's raw. It's numb. This is obviously emotional, having people talk about your job before you even know the status of your job moving forward. But I thought it was a fair question in the sense, you know, after now 3 seasons, sure, 12 wins are great, but how are you going to get us to buy back into it? And I think fans are expecting us to have some sort of Dan Campbell response, you know, tearful and banging his hand down and saying he's going to go bite kneecaps in the NFC East this year and then go over to 49ers and do it the same. That's just not Mike. And I think the rub here is Mike is a good guy. He's a good coach. Is he a great coach? I don't know. He's won a Lombardi. They tell you you're a good coach if you win a Super Bowl. But for the fans in Dallas, I think there is a level of apathy that's begun to set in here a little bit.
All right, tons of follow-up questions. Let's start with the one that's, you know, that arches overall as why Jerry decided to use the phrase Jane talked himself into keeping McCarthy. So walk me through best you can, because obviously only he knows between his temples what he was thinking. Why did he keep McCarthy, from your opinion?
I think continuity is a big deal. And I think Albert Breer hit the nail on the head when he talked about, you know, Jerry doesn't have a quick trigger when it comes to coaches. I mean, I think a lot of people think because of a lot of things that he says and he's a wheeling and a dealing and he's always working on all these business deals. Look at his staff. There's people in that building that have worked around Jerry in the front office and some of his executives for 3 decades now. When you look at Jason Garrett, he kept him here in Dallas for 10 years. The only exception was Chan Gailey and Dave Campo, quite frankly. They didn't get a lot of time, 2 and 3 years respectively for them. And so I don't know if maybe there is a lesson in some of that maybe Jerry should look at. I mean, some of these other teams feel, you know, look at Brandon Staley and the Chargers, look at Arthur Smith and the Falcons. They've been keen to move on. Look down at Houston and what they've been able to accomplish with DeMeco Ryan in his first season. I mean, an argument can be made that sometimes a different message is good. And quite frankly, they made a change with Jason Garrett. And despite that first year with COVID, look what Mike McCarthy did in years 2, 3, and 4. I think the big deal here is they only had 1 year with the Texas Coast. Think how many different offensive systems Dak Prescott has seen, despite there being similar terminology, et cetera. I think that they truly believe with 1 year left on Dak's deal as it stands and what they've been able to accomplish these last 3 seasons, I think Jerry actually still believes that this team is close. And you know this as well as anyone, Rich. The one thing that Jerry Jones is just abundant in, it's hope. It's optimism. I mean, hope floats could literally be a movie title described for Jerry Jones for all of these years. And so I do believe he talked himself into it. Now, what is curious to me is I respect the hell out of Peter King and Adam Schefter, but we started seeing these reports before the Cowboys got into the playoffs that depending on how they played, that if this thing went south, which it went about as south as you can go. I mean, this was Titanic sunk at the end of this game. Fans were leaving the exits before the fourth quarter. There was booing. That Bill Belichick would be in play. I've talked to a lot of people, both in the building and outside of it. I don't believe that Jerry even reached out to Bill. Now, I know Bill wanted the job. I know that he was looking to have somebody that I've spoken with prep him if they were to call. I know that Mike Vrabel would have liked this job. It's my understanding Jim Harbaugh would have loved this job. And I think that's the most frustrating part of all of this for the fans right now, Rich. This does hit different because in years past, the argument you would make was, well, if it's not Jason Garrett or it's not Mike McCarthy, who are you going to go and get? Well, this year you had a couple of really good options, and Jerry still decided to stay with Mike McCarthy. So I think that should tell you his thoughts on Mike McCarthy and maybe whether he's frustrated and mad. There's still this part of him that says, do I really want to reboot this thing or are we close? And I think Jerry always thinks he's close.
Yes, because Belichick's out there and Vrabel's out there and Harbaugh's out there. And so you're going to just do the same thing again. So I know this is still quite fluid. Is McCarthy going to go into this season with just nothing after this contractual season? That's it? There's no extension coming?
It doesn't sound like there's an extension. If you'll remember, our boy Ian Rappaport, right before the Dolphins game, was talking about legitimate bona fide discussions about Mike getting an extension. So, you know, it's peaks and valleys here in Dallas, Rich. I've described it sometimes for fans and even my own father. It's like a toxic relationship. There's love bombing. You get, a lot of love and support early on, and then they just ghost you in the postseason. There's gaslighting. You didn't see the product on the field. No, we're still a good team. We've got 12 wins, even though you know for a fact, your eyes show you that the postseason isn't where it needs to be. And then there's real high highs because you get all these players that are going to the Pro Bowl, Dak's having an MVP type year, and then the low lows because those guys don't show up in the postseason sometimes. So, I think some of us are just immune and used to it.
So, again, Jane Slater, my colleague from the NFL Network, NFL Media Group, joining us here in the news that Mike McCarthy is staying. You said the players are full-throated in support of Mike McCarthy. The play on the field certainly does not support that. That I said it when I came on the show on Monday. You used the Q word as well, quit. It looked like they quit in the middle of that game. I mean, Kyle Shanahan's soundbite of this week saying he started preparing for the Packers in the middle of the second quarter certainly landed here, and I'm sure it did in the Metroplex as well. So when you talk to the players, what do they say that they like about Mike McCarthy?
Well, it didn't translate well on Twitter. So because, as you know, we live in times, Rich, where people like to aggregate our content and then decide parse what they think is the narrative. And so my mistake was that I should have said this on a show like yours or on the NFL Network instead of tweet it. But for the most part, the players love the fact that he cares about them as men. You know, what I was described with, whether it be Dan Quinn or Mike McCarthy, what goes on between the shoulders and the head. He cares about where you are mentally. And he talked a little bit about that today, too. You know, Dak's got a mental health coach. I think that Mike understands sometimes the pressures that come with this job. But I think more importantly, as an outsider coming into Dallas, he knows the pressures that come with the star on the helmet. There's also his GPS system and his quarterback school and sort of the attention to stats. And he's been more aggressive as a coach when you look at the way they go for it at times. The way that he rests their bodies, I think that's huge when you talk to a lot of players. You know, the one thing I was told about Jason Garrett was he had really, really hard practices. And I'm not saying Mike's aren't, but Mike is more about collecting data. How much time does Tyron Smith need on the field? How much time does Micah Parsons need on the field? Can they have a veteran rest day so it allows them to have longevity within their bodies? Something as simple as bringing their families up there on Saturdays to interact with one another or step away from a meeting and tell someone you appreciate their support. And again, fans are hearing me say this and they're rolling their eyes. It sounds like Camp Cupcake up there. But my point is, he believes in them as men. I mean, the whole sleeping in their beds instead of hotel rooms when they have home games. I mean, look at their record this year with the exception of that playoff game. they played really, really well, and everyone kept trying to put their finger on, well, why are they playing so well? A lot of the players pointed to that. Now, where this story blew up and took on a life of its own was I added, one player did tell me that there was concern about a stubbornness to the scheme sometimes. In other words, they knew sometimes that other teams knew exactly what Dallas was going to do, and they didn't adjust accordingly. And so, like, even Dan Quinn, motion offense is really killing him this year. And then another line that blew up was that one said that they thought that Dak Prescott can sometimes panic when his first read's not there, but we know that when they get the ball to CeeDee Lamb, good things happen. Now, everyone thought that was a rat, a leak, an indictment of the locker room. I think the headline, I won't name the colleague, was that it was backstabbing. That's not what it was. It was, I think everybody is evaluating what is going on with this team. Why did certain things work? And I think everyone from coach to Dak to Jerry are evaluating, where am I doing this wrong? Now, whether those things get fixed, I don't know. But I think all of those are on the table, as evidenced by Mike saying that they had a 3-hour meeting.
So is Dan Quinn going to be part of the running it back? What do you think?
I think last year we thought he was going to Denver, right? And then all of a sudden he was back in Dallas. And in talking to his players, they said that they respected that he came back because he thought that there was unfinished business. You know, some of these job openings, they look really appealing sometimes, Rich. And then you get in there and you realize maybe this system doesn't make sense. Ask a lot of the Cowboys players when they go to another organization, they're like, wow, we've got it pretty good around here in Frisco with Jerry Jones. And so I don't know if that's going to be part of this for Dan Quinn. There's also a lot of responsibilities that come with being a head coach. I do know that he loves his players. I do know that those players want to get one for him. We'll just kind of have to see how this shakes out. But it sounds like they're open to the idea of him returning. But I also think you've got to consider, you know, our boy Adrian in research at NFL Network, I had him pull some numbers. Dan Quinn seems, we don't always talk about the defense and how it plays. They're really, really good against bad teams. But this year they were even worse against some of the good teams. And so they didn't get better at beating the good teams this year, or get better at beating the bad teams this year. They kind of got worse with some of those good teams.
Yeah, the Cowboys. The Cowboys.
So I think you've got to consider that.
Yeah, the Cowboys had that narrative for a while up until they beat Philadelphia at home. But who have you really beaten? And then they, wound up losing to Buffalo and Miami, and then pulled it out at the end to get into what appeared to be the catbird seat, the number 2 seed overall. But I think, just wrapping up our conversation here, and I understand why you asked about why fans should buy in, because everything you're telling me is like, hey, everything works. Players love it here. The coach loves it here. Quinn loves it here. They love the coach and they love Quinn. And then they lay an egg against Green Bay. And the question is like, well, we don't want to change. Everything's working here. Well, maybe you should change it, because what's been working doesn't work when it matters most. And the way to switch it up right now has a remarkable amount of decorated candidates sitting there saying, I'll take your job if you offer it, or have a conversation about it. That's about it.
And I think, Rich, the hard part, too, was everything started going their way, right? Like, it almost felt like this is too good to be true. I mean, we're talking 5 seed. You're a 2 seed. You are your best team when you're at home. Then we're talking injuries. I mean, right before the game, we found out Jair Alexander was playing and then Christian Watson. But Jair Alexander went out in the fourth quarter. And then now all of a sudden they start scoring at times. But I felt like they could have capitalized. And then why are you running the ball against that team? If you're going to establish an identity early, why aren't you taking some of those deep shots? And so everybody, I think, is to blame. And I think as we talk about the Cowboys, do have 16 free agents. They've got to figure out what are we going to do with next year. I think all of that's going to be on the table, because I think now you've got to also look at personnel. Like, do you have the right fits here? And has Jerry and company been aggressive enough at maybe getting you some players? This offseason, I've heard talk about Derrick Henry. Yeah, Derrick could be great here. He works out a lot here in the offseason at Sanders Fit. Yeah, that makes sense. They would love him. But you still got to pay CD. You got to pay Micah. You got to figure out what you're going to do with Dax Con. I mean, there's a lot of stuff they've got to figure out.
See, look at us having a 15-minute long conversation, Jane. It can be had. It can be had. Thanks for the 2 cents. Greatly appreciate it. We'll chat Sunday. I think, unless what? Because the Cowboys are out? What do we got?
They're out. I'm out. So if you ever want me on your show, let me know and tell my big Snoop Dogg what's up.
Hey, come on.
Well, thanks for the memories, Jane. We'll chat soon. Take care. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.